Love written in Urdu. The first time Aisha saw the words, they were scrawled across the margin of a library book, delicate, curving script that looked like birds in flight. She couldn't read them, these mysterious symbols that danced across the yellowed page, but something about their beauty made her heart catch in her throat. She was 23, a graduate student in comparative literature at Columbia University, spending her autumn afternoons in the Butler Library stacks. The book was a worn collection of Ghalib's poetry, mistakenly shelved in the English section. When she brought it to the circulation desk, the elderly librarian smiled knowingly. "Urdu poetry," he said, his accent thick with the memory of another homeland, the language of love and longing. Aisha couldn't explain why she checked out that book. She couldn't read a single word. But that night in her tiny studio apartment, she traced those marginal notes with her fingertips, wondering about the person who had written them, wondering what secrets they held. 3 weeks later, she posted a photograph of the page on a translation forum online. "Can anyone tell me what this says?" she typed, feeling foolish but unable to let it go. The response came at 2 in the morning. She was still awake, nursing chamomile tea and pretending to work on her thesis about Persian influence on Western Romantic poetry. "These are couplets, someone's personal additions to Ghalib's ghazals. Very beautiful, very sad. The handwriting is old-fashioned, elegant. Whoever wrote this had a classical education. Would you like me to translate them for you?" The username was simply Rumor Reader. No profile picture, no personal information. Just those words glowing on her screen. "Yes, please," she typed back immediately. "I'd be grateful." Over the next hour, the translations came through, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Lines about separation and yearning, about a beloved's eyes holding entire universes, about how love transforms ordinary moments into prayer. The anonymous translator added notes explaining the nuances, the double meanings, the way Urdu could express what English never quite captured. "The person who wrote these was deeply in love," Rumor Reader wrote, "and deeply in pain, ing." "How can you tell?" Aisha asked. "Because I recognize my own handwriting. Ambitiat." She stared at the screen, her tea growing cold. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, "I don't understand." "That book belonged to my grandfather. He died 15 years ago. I donated his entire collection to Columbia when my grandmother passed last year. I didn't know anyone would actually read them. I certainly didn't know anyone would care enough to seek out translations of his private notes." Text. His name was Zayn Ibrahim. He was a doctoral candidate in Islamic architecture, 30 years old, living in Brooklyn. They started emailing, first about the poetry, then about everything else. He told her about his grandfather, who had migrated from Lahore to New York in 1968, bringing nothing but books and heartache. His grandmother had been the love of his grandfather's life, but their marriage had been arranged, and his grandfather's first love, the woman he wrote those margins for, had married someone else. "He carried that grief until the day he died," Zayn wrote. "But he also carried tremendous love for my grandmother. Love isn't always what we imagine it will be. Sometimes it's more complicated, more human." Aisha told him about her own family, her mother, a second-generation Irish-American, her father who had left before she was born, the way she'd grown up feeling caught between worlds she didn't quite belong to. She told him about her obsession with poetry, with trying to understand how people across time and culture had attempted to capture something as impossible as love in words. "Maybe that's why I couldn't let go of your grandfather's notes," she wrote one night. "They felt like proof that love is real, that it matters enough to write in margins, in a language that might disappear, in words that might never be read." "They were read," he replied. "By you. Maybe that's what they were waiting for." Sex and verso. They met in person on a gray December afternoon in Central Park. She spotted him by the Bethesda fountain, exactly where he'd said he'd be, wearing a navy peacoat and holding 2 cups of coffee. He was taller than she'd imagined, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that looked both serious and kind. "Aisha?" he said, and his voice was warmer than she'd expected, with just a hint of nervousness. "Zayn," she breathed, and when he smiled, she felt something shift inside her chest, like tumblers in a lock falling into place. They walked for hours, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up between cultures, about learning Urdu from his grandparents while speaking English everywhere else, about feeling like he existed in a perpetual state of translation. She told him about her thesis, about how she was trying to argue that all poetry was essentially translation, of feeling into language, of the internal into the external, of the unspeakable into words. That's exactly what Urdu poetry is, he said, his eyes bright with excitement. It's trying to translate the experience of the divine into human language. Love poetry in Urdu is often simultaneously about romantic love and spiritual love. The beloved could be a person or could be God. That ambiguity is intentional. They stopped at a small cafe in the village as darkness fell. Over mint tea and baklava, he recited a couplet in Urdu, his voice soft and melodic. She didn't understand the words, but she understood everything. "What does it mean?" she asked. He looked down at his cup, suddenly shy. "It's from Faiz Ahmed Faiz. It says, 'If you look at me one more time, I will take the trouble to write.'" "To write what?" "Everything," he said, meeting her eyes. "All the words that exist between us." Winter turned to spring, and they became inseparable. He taught her Urdu slowly, patiently, starting with the alphabet, those beautiful flowing letters that had first captivated her. She was a terrible student, stumbling over pronunciation, mixing up letters, but he never laughed. Instead, he'd correct her gently, his hand covering hers as he guided her pen across the page. "This is Alif," he'd say. "It's the first letter. It stands alone, like you did when you found my grandfather's book." She taught him to see poetry everywhere, in graffiti on subway walls, in overheard conversations, in the way light fell through her apartment window at dawn. They'd spend Sundays at his grandmother's old apartment in Queens, which his family hadn't yet sold, surrounded by his grandfather's books. "Some things can only be said in Urdu," he told her once, lying on the floor of that apartment, surrounded by volumes of poetry. Like mohabbat. It means love, but it's deeper than that. It implies devotion, tenderness, a kind of love that transforms you. Or intizar, waiting, but waiting with hope and longing, waiting that is itself a form of love. "Say something to me in Urdu," she whispered, "something you can't say in English." He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. Then he spoke, the words flowing like music, like water, like prayer. When he finished, she saw tears in his eyes. "What did you say?" "I said that you are the answer to every question my grandfather wrote in those margins. I said that maybe love stories don't end. They just wait in the pages of books for the right person to find them. I said that I love you in a way that I don't have English words for." She kissed him then, tasting salt and sweetness, feeling like she'd finally found a language she'd been looking for her entire life. They were married the following autumn in a small ceremony that blended both their traditions. She wore ivory with red embroidered flowers. He wore a sherwani that had belonged to his grandfather. They read poetry in both Urdu and English, and when it came time for their vows, she surprised him. She'd spent months working with a tutor, memorizing and practicing. And when she spoke, it was in halting but heartfelt Urdu, promising to love him with mohabbat, to wait for him with intezar, to fill the margins of their life together with words that only they would understand. He wept openly as she spoke, and later he told her it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever done for him. "You learned my grandfather's language," he said that night, holding her close. "You learned the language of his love." "No," she corrected softly. "He learnt the language of ours." Years later, when they had children of their own, they would read to them from those same books of poetry, the ones with marginal notes in elegant script. They taught their daughter and son to read both English and Urdu, to understand that love exists in the spaces between languages, in the effort to communicate across difference, in the beauty of words that don't quite translate. And sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, Aisha would watch Zayn write in the margins of new books, notes in Urdu about their life together, about the ordinary miracles of marriage and family. "What are you writing?" she'd ask. And he'd smile and say, "Our story, so that someday someone might find it and remember that love, real love, is worth writing down, even in the margins, even in a language that might be forgotten, even when you're not sure anyone will ever read the words." She'd lean her head on his shoulder then, watching those familiar letters flow across the page, understanding that some love stories begin with an ending, and that the most powerful words are sometimes the ones we write for no one but ourselves, and for everyone who comes after, searching for proof that what they feel is real, is eternal, is worth the trouble of trying to translate the untranslatable human heart. Love, she learned, is written in every language, but theirs was written in Urdu, in the margins of old books, in the space between what can be said and what can only be felt, in the beautiful, imperfect translation of two hearts learning to speak as one,